The disappearing sister. I never believed in twin telepathy until my daughter Lily started talking about Sophia. That Tuesday morning in our suburban Chicago home became the beginning of everything I believed crumbling apart. I was packing lunches for my 10-year-old twins, Emma and Lily, when Lily suddenly froze with her spoon of cereal halfway to her mouth. She told me that Sophia had said the dolphins came back to her beach yesterday. When I asked who Sophia was, Lily explained that she was her other sister, who lived where it was always warm and smelled like salt water. Emma rolled her eyes and said Lily was making up imaginary friends again. But something in Lily's voice made me look closer. Her blue eyes held that distant quality I'd noticed lately during her Sophia stories. It wasn't the playful tone she used for make-believe games. I sat down across from her and asked her to tell me more about Sophia. Lily explained that Sophia had the same birthday as them. Emma looked up from her homework and said she'd never talked to anyone named Sophia. Lily insisted that she had when they were little. Sophia remembered and was sad that Emma had forgotten. That night, I found Emma crying in her room. When I asked what was wrong, she told me she kept having dreams about a girl who looked like them. The girl called her name, but Emma couldn't reach her. Emma asked if Lily was sick and why she was saying these things. I held Emma tighter, but inside, panic was building. Both twins were experiencing something. This wasn't just Lily's imagination. The breaking point came during parent-teacher conferences in November. Mrs. Patterson, their fourth-grade teacher, pulled me aside after discussing Emma's excellent grades. She wanted to ask about something Lily had brought for show and tell the previous week. She had an old photograph of 3 babies. Lily said it was her, Emma, and her sister Sophia. The thing was, there really did appear to be 3 infants in that photo. My heart stopped. When I asked what photo, Mrs. Patterson said Lily claimed she'd found it in our family album. The teacher didn't want to embarrass her in front of the class, but thought I should know. I drove home in a daze. When I asked Lily about the photograph, she ran upstairs and returned with a faded Polaroid I'd never seen before. 3 tiny babies lay on a hospital blanket. 2 were obviously Emma and Lily. I recognized the small birthmark on Emma's shoulder. But the 3rd baby, when I asked Lily where she'd found this photo, she said it was in the old shoebox in Daddy's closet. Sophia had shown her in a dream where to look. That night, after the girls were asleep, I tore David's closet apart. Hidden behind winter coats, I found a shoebox I'd never noticed before. Inside were hospital bracelets, 3 of them. Birth certificates marked Twin A, Twin B, Twin C, and letters sent from Florida, signed in a woman's handwriting. Hope the girls are growing up happy. Sophia asks about her sisters every day. My hands shook as I read the date on the envelope. The letters had been coming every few months for the past 10 years. The return address read, Maria Johnson, Sarasota, Florida. Maria was my cousin, the one who'd moved to Florida after college and whom we'd lost touch with years ago. I sat on the closet floor with the box in my hands, and everything began forming a terrifying picture. My labor had been difficult. Emergency C-section, anesthesia complications. I'd lost consciousness and didn't wake up for 3 days. When I came to, the doctors told me I'd given birth to healthy twins. No one had ever mentioned a 3rd baby. The next morning, I called in sick to work. David left early, and the girls were at school. I sat at the kitchen table with the letters and read every single one. Emma stood in the doorway, looking at the photo with an expression I couldn't read. Emma slowly approached and touched the photograph with her finger. She said she remembered her. Not in real life, but in dreams. There had always been 3. But then one disappeared, and she thought she'd just stopped having those dreams. That night, I lay awake, processing what I'd learned. My husband and my mother had made a decision for me while I was unconscious. They'd given away my daughter without asking my consent. They'd hidden the truth from me for 10 years. When David came home from work the next morning, I was waiting with the box on the table. He saw it and stopped dead in his tracks. His face went white as a sheet. He sat across from me and told me the whole truth. The doctors had warned that complications could recur if I became stressed. My mother had suggested giving one baby to Maria, who'd been trying to get pregnant for years. David had agreed, thinking he was protecting me. He said he'd plan to tell me when I recovered. But weeks passed, then months, and it became harder. Then the first letter came from Maria, and he realized Sophia was happy. He decided it was better not to destroy 3 families for the sake of his conscience. I looked at the husband I'd lived with for 15 years and didn't recognize him. He'd stolen my daughter and 10 years of lies. The next day, I bought a plane ticket to Sarasota. I didn't tell David. I didn't tell the girls. I just knew I had to see Sophia with my own eyes. The address led me to a quiet neighborhood with white houses and palm trees. Maria's house was exactly as Lily had described: white fence, blooming garden, the sound of the ocean in the background. I parked across the street and waited. The school bus stopped at the corner, and a girl got off. My heart stopped beating. Sophia was an exact copy of Emma and Lily, but with something special in her facial expression. She was tanned, with sun-bleached hair, wearing a white sundress and bare feet. On her wrist was a bracelet made of shells, exactly as Lily had described. A large golden dog ran out to meet her, wagging its tail. Sophia laughed and hugged the dog. Then she suddenly stopped and looked directly at my car. For a second, our eyes met. Sophia tilted her head as if trying to remember something. Then she waved at me, smiled, and ran toward the house. I sat in the car, gripping the steering wheel, and cried. Sophia was beautiful. She was happy. She had a loving family, a dog, a house by the ocean, everything I could never have given her in our cold Chicago. But she was my daughter. I started the car and drove back to the airport without getting out of the car, without knocking on the door. All the way home, I thought about what was scarier: taking her from the only family she'd ever known, or leaving, knowing I had a 3rd daughter living 1,000 miles away from me. I sat them down one evening after dinner and explained everything. How Sophia was given away when they were born, how she'd been living in Florida all these years, how she'd never stopped thinking about them. Emma listened quietly, then asked if that's why she always felt like something was missing. She said she'd had dreams about a 3rd person her whole life, but never understood what they meant. Now everything made sense. Lily wasn't surprised at all. She told me Sophia had been preparing her for this conversation for weeks. Sophia had been getting stronger in her dreams, showing her more details about her life in Florida. Lily even described Maria's house perfectly, down to the wind chimes on the porch that I'd noticed during my visit. The night before the video call, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what I would say to Sophia. How do you explain to a 10-year-old that her mother didn't abandon her? but simply didn't know she existed. How do you apologize for 10 years of absence that wasn't your choice? When Saturday morning arrived, we all gathered around my laptop in the living room. My hands were shaking as I clicked the video call link. The screen flickered, and then there she was. Sophia looked exactly like Emma and Lily, but her face was glowing with excitement. Behind her, I could see Maria and a man I assumed was her husband, Roger. Sophia waved at the camera and said she'd been waiting for this day her whole life. The first few minutes were awkward. Emma and Lily stared at their sister through the screen, trying to process that she was real. But then Sophia started talking about her dreams, describing things she'd seen about their lives in Chicago, and the ice broke. She knew Emma's favorite color was purple, even though Maria had never told her. She knew Lily was afraid of thunderstorms. She knew about our old cat Whiskers, who had died 2 years ago. The twins realized their sister had been watching over them in her own way all these years. For an hour, the 3 girls talked like they'd never been separated. They compared scars and birthmarks. They laughed about the same jokes. They even finished each other's sentences. It was like watching a miracle unfold. But then came the hard questions. Sophia asked why I'd given her away. Maria quickly intervened, explaining that I hadn't known, that the decision had been made while I was unconscious. Sophia's face changed as she processed this information. She looked directly at me through the screen and asked if I would have kept her if I'd known. I told her the truth, that I would never have let her go, that not a day would pass from now on, that I wouldn't regret not being there for her first 10 years. Sophia was quiet for a moment, then said something that broke my heart. She said she understood why everyone made the choices they did. Sophia was excited about the possibility of spending summers with us. She wanted to see snow for the first time, to meet Emma and Lily's friends, to experience life in a big city. But there were practical concerns too. Sophia had never been away from Maria for more than a few days. She'd never experienced Chicago winters. She had friends and activities in Florida that she didn't want to give up. We decided to start small. Sophia would come to Chicago for 2 weeks during spring break. If that went well, we'd plan a longer summer visit. Those 2 weeks in March were transformative for all of us. From the moment Sophia stepped off the plane at O'Hare, it was like she'd always been part of our family. She fit seamlessly into our routines, shared a room with Lily, and bonded instantly with Emma. But I also saw how different she was from the twins. 10 years in Florida had shaped her into someone more outgoing, more confident in some ways. She was fascinated by the city, but also overwhelmed by the pace and the crowds. She missed the ocean, the constant warmth, the laid-back lifestyle she was used to. The hardest moment came when she asked to see the hospital where she was born. I took all 3 girls there, and we stood in the parking lot, looking up at the maternity ward windows. Sophia asked which room she'd been born in, and I realized I didn't know. That was information David had kept from me. That evening, I finally confronted David properly about what he'd done. For months, we'd been living in a state of cold détente, barely speaking except about practical matters concerning the girls. But seeing Sophia in our home, watching her interact with her sisters, made the magnitude of his deception real in a way it hadn't been before. I told him I wanted to separate, not just because of the lie about Sophia, but because of what the lie represented. For 10 years, he'd looked me in the eye every day, knowing he was keeping my daughter from me. He'd watched me grieve what I thought was my inability to have more children, never telling me I already had a third daughter. David broke down then, admitting that the guilt had been eating him alive. He'd wanted to tell me countless times, especially when I'd talked about wanting another baby. But as the years passed, it became harder, not easier. He was afraid I'd leave him, afraid I'd hate him, afraid of destroying what we'd built. He was right about one thing. I did hate him, at least for a while. But as Sophia's visit continued, I realized that hate was just hurting all of us. Sophia adored David, who was the only father figure she'd known besides Roger. She didn't understand why there was tension between us. On Sophia's last night in Chicago, all three girls slept in the same room. Technically, I could fight for full custody, but that's not what anyone wants, including Sophia. Instead, we're working on a formal arrangement that recognizes both families' roles in her life. It's unconventional, but then again, so is our entire situation. Emma has started keeping a journal specifically for Sophia, writing down everything that happens in Chicago so her sister won't miss anything important. Lily has appointed herself Sophia's dream messenger, claiming she can still communicate with Sophia when they're both sleeping. Whether or not that's true, the bond between the three of them is undeniable. They are sisters in every sense that matters, and 10 years of separation couldn't change that. I still don't know what the future holds. I don't know if this arrangement will work long term, or if Sophia will eventually choose to live primarily with one family or the other. I don't know if David and I can rebuild our marriage after such a fundamental betrayal of trust. But I know one thing for certain. My three daughters found their way back to each other, despite everything that tried to keep them apart. Love really is stronger than distance. Some connections really can't be broken, and family isn't just about who lives under the same roof. It's about who lives in the same heart. This summer, for the first time in 10 years, all three of my daughters will be home.